0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Good evening. Welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, News 95.5 AM 750 WSB. The phone number 404-872-0750 1-800 WSB Talk. The President of the United States going to address the nation tonight about the southern border. He's going to go pay a visit to the southern border on Thursday and wants to, apparently, if press reports are accurate, wants to declare an emergency along the southern border in order to use governmental powers to reprogram tax dollars. Now, what does that actually mean? I want to spend some time with you this evening and explain to you what exactly it means for the president to declare a national emergency, and then once he's declared a national emergency, to reprogram dollars. Now, for some of this, I explained it last night, that the president has the power because Congress has given ample discretion to the executive branch on how to spend the money Congress allocates. The president does have it within his discretion to spend money allocated by Congress and reprogram that money for other purposes under certain scenarios. One of those scenarios is sometimes to declare a national emergency. I want to give you some background on what a national emergency is and what the president has to do to declare a national emergency first. For starters, there are 28 existing states of emergency in the United States. Ryan Struck at CNN broke these down for us earlier. The longest existing emergency still active in the United States was declared on November 14th, 1979 by Jimmy Carter to block Iranian government property. Then there are these others. The second oldest still in effect is the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction from 1994. There's the prohibiting transactions with terrorists who threaten to disrupt the Middle East peace process from 95. Prohibiting certain transactions with respect to the development of Iranian petroleum resources from 95. Blocking assets and prohibiting transactions with narcotics traffickers from 95. Regulations of the anchorage and movement of vessels with respect to Cuba from 96, blocking Sudanese government property and prohibited transactions with Sudan from 97, blocking property persons who threaten international stabilization efforts in the Western Balkans, export control regulations from 2001, national emergency by reason of certain terrorist attacks from September 14th, 2001 in relation to the September 11th attacks, and on these go. A lot of them have to do with dealings in Iraq or in Syria or the Democratic Republic of Congo, blocking property of persons undermining Lebanon, things like that. The president is allowed to declare states of emergency under the national, let me get the name right, the National Emergencies Act. In doing so, the president has to set forward provisions of various laws he believes give him emergency powers in order to declare the state of emergency. The state of emergency must be renewed annually by the president in a certification to Congress, and more importantly, the Congress, by a joint resolution of the House and the Senate, can end any declared emergency by the president. That's pretty important here. You see, one of the strategies the Democrats have moving forward on this government shutdown, which we'll get to here in a minute, is they're hoping more and more Republicans will vote with the Democrats and provide them enough votes to overcome the president's veto threat and get an override of a presidential veto for a spending resolution. We're not there yet in terms of votes, but the Democrats are hoping. In terms of the national emergency, there's another issue, though, the president has to have, is some of the land along the Rio Grande and the border between the Mexico and the United States is private property. There's actually a pretty in-depth well of legal precedent here that presidents of the United States cannot use eminent domain to take property just by declaring an emergency. What the president actually has to do is find a provision of law that would apply to a national emergency and then declare eminent domain under that. He's got to find a specific provision of federal law that specifically gives eminent domain. The Supreme Court has been very clear on this going back to the 1820s. That eminent domain is not presumed. The president actually has to find a statute that specifically gives eminent domain power in order to take private land. And then in so doing, the president has to see if that eminent domain provision can be applied to a national emergency declaration. But then there's another caveat, and I've read several different legal scholars today who all disagree on parameters, but all seem largely to agree on this issue. The president cannot deploy the Army to build the law on federal land. That the Army in a state of emergency can be deployed to build things, but must build things that are authorized by congressional legislation. Now, if you're listening, you'll say, but wait, didn't Congress authorize building of a wall along the Mexican border when Bush was president? Yes, it did. But that was a civilian project authorized outside of the purview of national defense. It wasn't considered a defensive project at the time. So that raises a legal question. Ultimately, what I'm telling you here is that the president, if he does do a national emergency, it's going to be very difficult for him to use eminent domain by declaring a national emergency. It'll be even more difficult to use the military. And then, of course, there are going to be the federal judges who issue injunctions and say, no, Mr. President, you can't do this. That could very well delay anything the president wants to do until he's out of office. I mean, it could stretch for 6 years in a legal fight before the president would be allowed to do anything. So there's no guarantee even the president declaring a national emergency means he'll be able to do something. It may just be easier for the president to, I don't know, keep the government shut down, dare Republicans to fold, and make the Democrats cough up some money if they want to reopen the government. As this shutdown goes on, more and more parts of the government are going to start winding down. At some point, someone's going to have to want to actually open the government. And if the president draws a line in the sand, digs in his heels, and says it's not going to be reopened unless the Republicans sell me out or you give me money, it's not really going to look good for a lot of Republicans come 2020 that they've sold out the president. That may be the path of least resistance for him to go forward. More on national emergencies, how they're broken down, what they mean. But first, we got to go check with Mark McKay on traffic.
Sir, good afternoon. 414, we start with a